Good evening, everyone. I'm Robin Garrell, the president of the CUNY Graduate Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our 5th annual Dissertation Showcase. We are here to celebrate the cutting-edge research of Graduate Center doctoral students who are completing their degrees. Our students have tackled difficult and important problems. They've asked original questions, taken deep dives into archives, applied new techniques and methods to long-standing problems, and created new knowledge. Their research is innovative, rigorous, often collaborative, and as you'll see, their discoveries are thought-provoking and consequential. You'll find that these presentations will echo in conversations long after this event. We have a global audience tuning in tonight from across the US, Canada, Mexico, from Sweden, France, England, Germany, Portugal, Azerbaijan, Ghana, Nigeria, India, Sri Lanka, Australia, the Philippines. Welcome, everyone. Completing a doctorate is a long and difficult journey. The students presenting tonight have taken on an additional challenge. They have aimed to capture years of research and hundreds of dissertation pages into a brief, engaging presentation, selecting and distilling their work into a 3-minute story created for a general audience, for you. This year, 34 brave students submitted applications, and we had a very difficult task choosing just 11 participants for today's event. I want to thank all the students who applied and also the selection committee of faculty, students, and staff who read the submissions and chose the participants. Unlike in prior years, when the presentations were pre-recorded, this year our presenters will appear live. The pressure is on. The research they will describe spans disciplines from biochemistry to business to theater. You will hear about how cancer cells resist treatments, why innocent people plead guilty, new thinking on disaster and debt relief in Puerto Rico, and much more. It's the depth and the range of scholarship and its public impact that distinguish doctoral education at the CUNY Graduate Center. Now, this evening, we will once again award the Presidential Prize for Public Communication. This award goes to the presenter who is judged to be the most effective in communicating their work to the public, a key skill as all students advance in their professions. And this year, for the very first time, you, the audience, will take an active role in determining the winner of the Audience Choice Award. So I'm going to ask you now to pay close attention as you listen to tonight's presenters. Jot down as you go, you're going to get to vote for the one presenter whom you think has done the best job communicating their research question and discoveries in an informative and compelling way. So keep track. You're only going to have a couple minutes when the poll comes up. Now, along with the honorarium that's given to all the presenters, each of our 2 award winners will receive an additional $1,000 prize. So now I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed panel of judges. Judges, would you please turn on your cameras and your mics? And I'll start by introducing Dr. Christopher Emdin. He is the Robert A. Maslin Endowed Chair in Curriculum Theory and Professor of Education at the University of Southern California. A former high school science and math teacher and a passionate advocate for educational equity, Chris has mastered the art of making complex subjects accessible, especially to young people. Watch his TED Talks or the spoken word essay he created for the PBS NewsHour, and you will be amazed. He's the author of For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and the Rest of Y'all Too, and the creator of the hip hop and social media movement. In 2020, Time Magazine named him one of 27 people bridging divides in American life. We're proud to say he's an alumnus of the CUNY Graduate Center, where he earned his Ph.D. in urban studies. Chris, we're delighted to have you back with us. Thank you for being here. Would you like to say a few words?
Sure, I am humbled to be able to be here. All of the abstracts I read thus far are so powerful and engaging. And this is all in the tradition of the Graduate Center. High intellectual and academic work, relatable to the public and making impact. So I can't wait to hear these presentations.
Thank you, Chris. The second judge I'd like to introduce is Joanna Migdoll. She's served as a trustee of the Graduate Center Foundation for close to 10 years, and she's a great supporter of this Dissertation Showcase. She currently runs a financial consulting firm offering expertise to institutional and high net worth clients. Before her career in finance, she was a medical social worker and has done graduate work in both finance and social work at NYU. So Joanna, thank you so much for your support and for joining us this evening. Would you like to say a few words?
I would, Robin. I would like to tell everyone how honored I am to be here and how eager I am to hear the varied and rigorous research that I know I will hear about. You know, Robin, you mentioned that this is a long and difficult journey to get here. It's also an expensive one. And the foundation is raising money to try to offset some of your expenses in research and travel and in design, whatever we can do. So I'm particularly eager to hear and be able to report back to the foundation, you know, what we spent our money on, what we raised it for. So I'm looking forward.
Thank you for mentioning that. For those of the audience who get really excited about these talks, we welcome your support going forward. And their third judge is Amy Caldwell. She's the editorial director of Beacon Press, an independent publisher of cultural and historical distinction. As such, she says she's always interested in scholars who can engage the broader public. Beacon Press has published the work of authors who've had an enduring impact on the world. Writers like James Baldwin, Lonnie Gagné, Cornel West, and Amy's fellow judge, Christopher Emdin. She's a graduate of Occidental College and earned a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at Arizona State University. The books she has acquired for Beacon have explored topics ranging from interfaith issues to environmental journalism to the immigrant experience. Amy, we're so grateful that you could join us for the 2022 Dissertation Showcase. Would you like to say a few words?
I would. Thank you so much. It is a real honor for me to be here as well. I enjoyed reading the dissertation abstracts so much, and I can't wait to hear the presentations. Beacon Press is a press that really believes both in engaged scholarship and in the importance of scholarship that is presented engagingly, that engages the public, and that does so to better our society, to better the world. And I think everyone here is working at that at one way or another, and I'm excited to hear these presentations.
Thank you. And maybe some of our presenters will become authors who publish with Beacon. Who knows?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, now we're ready for the students' presentation. So I'm going to take just a moment to explain how this is going to work. Each student will speak for 3 minutes. That's it. Immediately following, each one will be followed by the next student. And after the last presenter, I'll ask the students to join me for the live Q&A. Now, you, the audience, will be able to submit your questions to the Q&A box throughout the time. The chat will also be open for your observations. And remember, you're going to be voting at the end to select the audience choice winner, so keep track of that. So we're about to begin, and it's going to be a stack of presentations without a break. So I'll start by introducing our first presenter. It's Max Osborne. So judges, please turn off your cameras and let's begin.
Being a queer or transgender person means constantly navigating the tension between visibility and safety. Queer and trans people are targeted by police at higher rates than straight cisgender people and often experience harassment and violence from officers. These policing practices are rooted in now obsolete laws criminalizing gender nonconformity, but continue today in the form of subjective enforcement against people viewed as disruptive to social norms. Given this context, I sought to learn how queer and trans people navigate risk and safety in response to precarious situations such as police encounters. I also wanted to know more about how police encounters compared to interactions with other institutions such as social service providers, where there is also an inherent power imbalance and a goal of surveilling and regulating people's behavior. I interviewed 42 LGBTQIA+ New Yorkers about their experiences with identity, presentation, encounters with police, and access to social services. I also talked to 15 service providers, such as counselors, legal services providers, and health outreach workers, about the barriers queer and trans clients face to accessing care. Queer and trans people reported predominantly negative experiences with police, including insufficient response to requests for help, verbal harassment, and physical violence. Certain environments, including encounters with police and service providers, became sites in which gender and sexuality norms were heightened and scrutinized, and in which transgressing gendered expectations carried potentially serious consequences. In these contexts, queer and trans people felt pressure to adapt themselves to appear more normative and to stand out less as targets of harm. This might mean using strategies like changing one's clothing or body language, being deferential and compliant, or essentially performing whatever gender role they felt was expected of them. It's a weird thing with authority almost, said one participant, a white non-binary person, that kind of makes you feel compelled to resort or revert to whatever the more socially acceptable presentation would be. Some avoided police and service providers altogether because of fear of being harmed or denied access to help. Importantly, the risk management strategies available to queer and trans people depended heavily on other aspects of identity and privilege. For example, one white transmasculine person said he had a lot of relative privilege interacting with police because they didn't know he was trans. However, he feared that police might harm him if they found out, so this privilege could be revoked at any time. By contrast, an Afro-Indigenous non-binary person said, "There's literally nothing that I can possibly do to look like a safe person who's not going to get hurt," meaning that their race would always make them a target for police regardless of their gender presentation. What does this tell us, and why is this important? Queer and trans people still constitute vulnerable populations that continue to be harmed by institutions like police, which are ostensibly put in place to enhance public safety. If these populations don't see institutions as viable avenues of help, it will require different solutions to provide them with resources. While recent media coverage has focused on legislative efforts to restrict queer and trans people's presence in other institutions such as education and sports, I hope that my findings will also help to illustrate the continued need for inclusive, culturally competent service provision, as well as alternate non-police responses to crisis situations. Thanks. Now I'll turn it over to Lynn Stillings from the Ethnomusicology program.
The first night of the singing competition TV show Sen Petit Galley, Senegalese adolescents took to the stage to sing their 2018 hit Yaru Right Now, encouraging universal access to education. Moments later, one of the girls confidently declared, quote, "I am a child. I have to go to school so that I can contribute to the development of my country. But if I don't go to school, tomorrow, who will be president? Tomorrow, who will be a teacher?" End quote. I consider myself among an emerging group of ethnomusicologists focused on the issues of representation, sustainability, and effectiveness of musical aid and humanitarianism. My dissertation provides the critical examination of how both international and local programs in Dakar, Senegal, use music to raise awareness and promote children's rights. These programs address issues including education, early marriage, healthcare, forced child labor, and girls' equality, with children as central performers and songwriters. When I began this research, I sought out spaces where children learn or perform music, particularly for children not born into hereditary families of musicians and praise singers. My young interlocutors revealed that children are highly engaged in cosmopolitan musical networks, challenging a common romanticization that children's music is simply didactic songs and clapping games. I conducted 19 months of ethnographic research in Dakar at an international children's rights NGO, a local hip hop youth association, a children's TV show, and an elementary school to analyze the different ways children engage in issues of rights through music. Adolescent girls, as part of the Baka initiative, learn to write rap songs about their rights and feminine leadership. The refrain of one song repeats in Wolof, "Jigen Jambarla, Jigen Combatante," woman, she's brave, woman, a fighter. On the television show Sen Petit Galley, contestants perform well-known songs from the Senegalese popular music genre mbalax. In the second episode, two girls sang Viviane's song Mariage Forcé, about a teenager being forced to marry an older man, but who wishes to stay in school. Meanwhile, at school, children learn that not only do they have rights, but also responsibilities. They learn songs about respecting their mothers, helping their younger siblings, and observing the holy month of Ramadan. I came to understand that through this performance context, local interpretations and advocacy of children's rights posit an Africa-centered conceptualization of global children's rights. Music alone cannot create substantial social change without also taking into account historical, political, and economic contexts. In Dakar, children's rights music programs offer an alternative path of expression for young people, as well as a platform for children and youth to participate in local cultural production. I hope that my research models the ways that we can more effectively listen to children and include their voices in the discourses of rights and development. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to George Anwar in the biochemistry program, who will give the next talk.
The human body is made up of small structures called cells, which divide rapidly. Imagine the division of these cells is controlled in a manner similar to the red and green signal of a traffic light, where red signal stop dividing and green signal continue to divide. In cancers, the cells only respond to the green signal. As such, they continuously divide in ways that are detrimental to the human body. One gene which can signal red is called p53, but when it changes or becomes mutated, it can no longer signal red. The cells therefore continuously divide, leading to a variety of human cancers. For my dissertation research, I wanted to study mutated p53 in a subgroup of breast cancer called triple-negative breast cancer, which disproportionately affects women of African American descent. I focused on two adjacent regions of the mutated p53. One region, which helps p53 form a four-member structure, and a second region, which contains a lot of positively charged amino acid that helps p53 bind to DNA. These two regions act in a way to accelerate tumor growth. Therefore, if we understand how they act, we can short-circuit the spread of tumor. I address this question by exploring how the inability to form the four-membered structure or the loss of the positively charged amino acid had on the activity of mutated p53. I used the gene editing technique called CRISPR-Cas9. Through this approach, I was able to generate different forms of the mutated p53. One form in which they lack the ability to form the four-member structure, and a second form in which they lack the positively charged amino acid. Through this work, we were able to show that the region that helped p53 form the four-member structure was not critical to the activity of mutated p53. Rather, the region that contains a lot of positively charged amino acid was critical to mutant p53 being cancer-causing. The take-home message of this research is that the region that contains the positively charged amino acid plays critical role in tumor formation and progression. Therefore, with this understanding, we can develop therapeutic remedies to target this region. Thank you. I will pass it to Lennay Chapman from the business school.
Imagine you sent a small Venmo payment to a friend, and something about that payment changed what your friend thought about you or even how they treated you. My dissertation suggests that this could happen. I was interested in this topic because so much of modern social life takes place through online platforms. Yet online, we lack well-established social norms. As consumers, we may not know how our decisions are perceived by others or influence others' behavior toward us. I investigated the impact of choosing to conduct payments privately or publicly. On Venmo, public transactions are the default, and to date, more than 207 million transactions have been conducted publicly. Yet, I found consistent evidence that there are interpersonal benefits associated with sending payments privately. Why might that be? To understand, let's think about the implications of transacting privately versus publicly. Here we have an example of a private payment on the left and a public payment on the right. When you send a payment privately, your friend has two options. One, they could continue keeping the payment private. Or two, they could choose to disclose the payment details to others. Again, because you chose to transact privately, your friend has two options. Yet, if you choose to transact publicly, your friend loses the option to keep the payment private. Through your decision to send the money publicly, you have already disclosed the information to others, and the ability to keep it private no longer exists. Making choices that maximize rather than reduce others' options is called socially mindful behavior. When people demonstrate the socially mindful behavior of paying privately, others infer that they, the payer, possess stronger communal traits, which is to say, traits that demonstrate consideration toward others. If someone has strong communal traits, people tend to expect that they will be considerate of others in a variety of situations. People tend to believe private payers will behave more cooperatively because they possess those stronger communal traits. In turn, when interacting with private payers, people themselves become more likely to cooperate. To conduct this research, I sampled approximately 1,300 participants across 8 studies. In one experimental study, participants imagined receiving either a private or a public payment from a new friend. Then they imagined playing a game with that same friend. Results showed that they expected a friend who paid privately to behave more fairly in the game. In response, participants were more likely to cooperate by accepting private payers' offers within the game. This research is important for 2 reasons. One, the business managers running online platforms may be interested to know that public interactions can negatively influence the very social relationships they aim to serve. 2, many online platforms give consumers the ability to interact with others privately or publicly, and consumers deserve to know the implications associated with that choice. So, the next time you're sending a payment, remember that from an interpersonal perspective, there are real advantages to keeping it private, which is to say, just between you and me. Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Sarah Molinari from the anthropology program.
What can a hurricane reveal about society? On September 20th, 2017, Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico among the US territory's historic bankruptcy. Over a decade of debt crisis and austerity politics exacerbated the storm's uneven impact and exposed the realities of Puerto Rico's colonial relationship with the United States. I have learned that despite these forces, Puerto Ricans have worked towards more just futures through innovative forms of activism and community organizing. My dissertation is the result of over 10 years of scholarly and activist ties with Puerto Rico and a commitment to engaged anthropology. I analyze how years of public disinvestment shaped the social disaster following Hurricane Maria, and I focus on 2 political projects situated at the intersection of debt and disaster that offer us new ways to imagine a justice-oriented recovery. The first is a women-led grassroots mutual aid center in a rural neighborhood, and the second is a San Juan urban-based group organizing around a citizen audit of Puerto Rico's public debt. I conducted 19 months of ethnographic fieldwork using archival methods, participant observation, interviews, oral histories, and digital ethnography. Contrary to media narratives that portrayed Puerto Ricans in need of help from the US government or charitable organizations, I found that communities were organizing in creative ways to both meet collective survival needs and critique the conditions they found themselves in. For instance, women and elders in a rural neighborhood drew on years of activism to occupy and rescue a closed school and repurpose the structure as a community kitchen and service hub that persists to this day. Their mutual aid project assembles what I call infrastructures of care, which respond to histories of dispossession and environmental harm, to contest official disaster governance practices that promote individualized, market-based recovery approaches. Furthermore, I found that activism around auditing public debt drew on Global South repertoires of anti-debt politics that understand debt as a tool of colonial domination. Through protest, popular education, citizen investigations, and legal interventions, activists showed how Puerto Rico's debt can be interpreted as illegal or illegitimate because of constitutional violations and predatory repayment terms. This study provides insight from frontline Caribbean communities into everyday negotiations of overlapping crises. As climate change exacerbates global inequality, Puerto Ricans struggling around debt and ecological crisis provide us urgent lessons in how disaster recovery might be reimagined around human needs. Now I will turn it over to Pamela Fieldman from the Theater and Performance Studies program.
Picture two actresses perched high above a stage on a silvery cloud, fighting. One prevails and the other is pushed off the cloud, plummeting downward and disappearing through a trapdoor in the floor of the stage. That is what Spanish audiences who attended the 1653 production of Fortunas de Andromeda y Perseo saw, and they were thrilled by the spectacle. When I saw a drawing of this moment, more than 300 years later, I was also thrilled. The drawing is one of 11 illustrations of this production, created by the Italian artist Baccio del Bianco, who also designed the sets, costumes, and special effects. These illustrations hint at the imaginative and technical skills required to create theater for European courts in the early modern period. As a historian of theater design, I wanted to know more about Baccio del Bianco. How did the child of a Florentine textile merchant, whose early career was in engineering and fresco painting, become a designer for King Philip IV of Spain, one of the most powerful men on the planet? While this may seem like a specific line of inquiry, following it sheds light on a larger issue in theater history. It can be hard to understand historical theatrical practices because most of what remains are scripts, audience descriptions, and commemorative drawings. These often miss important elements of production, particularly when it comes to the design and construction processes. So we have an idea of what happened, but not how it was accomplished. My dissertation focuses on how Baccio del Bianco's life and non-theater work prepared him to master the elite genre of court theater. His varied professional experiences gave him the tools to make innovative spectacles, and studying them provides insight into how theater production incorporated existing technologies to, for example, make an actress appear to fall from the sky and disappear. My research took me to 8 archives across 3 countries. I looked at Baccio del Bianco's will in the Notary Archives of Madrid, Spain, almost 300 of his drawings in the research collection of the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, Italy, and was fortunate to be among the last scholars to view the manuscript containing the illustrations of Andromeda y Perseo at the Houghton Library in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Sadly, the manuscript has deteriorated and is no longer accessible. Working across multiple languages posed significant challenges, especially since many of the documents were handwritten. requiring not just translation, but a process of transcription that sometimes meant hours puzzling over idiosyncratic letter forms. There's so much more to be said about the spectacular theatrical feats of 17th century European theaters and the often unknown men who imagined and executed them. My work seeks to recover these artists' lives, to provide vital clues into how the role of the designer coalesced over time into a profession that has become essential to the kinds of theater we love today. Thank you. And now, Karen Okigbo from Sociology.
Selecting a life partner is arguably one of the most important decisions in a person's life. What qualities should I look for in the person I'm marrying? To what extent should I take race, ethnicity, religion, income, or even education into consideration? Will my family and friends approve of my partner? These are a few of the questions young adults often ask when deciding whom to marry. In the US, where race is incredibly important, immigrants present a unique opportunity to study how people make this critical decision. My dissertation examines the social decision-making of the US-born children of Nigerian immigrants as they navigate the dating and marriage process. This study serves as a point of departure for reframing the story of intermarriage from one that primarily focuses on mixed-race unions with white partners to one that highlights diversity within the Black population. I do this by asking the overarching research question: how do second-generation Nigerian Americans decide whom to marry? The short answer is that this decision-making process is not so black and white, and understandably remains quite complicated. I demonstrate using both quantitative and qualitative methods how the factors of parental pressure, race, ethnicity, gender, and religion complicate the decision of who these young adults date and eventually marry. My dissertation argues for a more nuanced definition of intermarriage and begins with a demographic profile of intermarriage by race and ethnicity, using harmonized census data from 1980 through 2019. However, the majority of questions are answered using 4 years of ethnographic data, which includes focus groups and in-depth interviews with 75 participants. Popular culture tends to define marriage as two people independently picking each other. Social scientists often define intermarriage as the union between partners of different races. For some time now, the underlying presumption of this body of literature was that marrying a white partner signaled increased integration and the shrinking social distance between racial groups. One of my key demographic findings is that among second-generation Nigerian Americans, remarkably, a third of them married a Nigerian spouse, a third of them married a Black spouse, and a third of them married a non-Black spouse of a different race or ethnicity. These findings highlight how defining intermarriage solely in terms of interracial unions misses 2/3 of the story. As one male interview participant explained, "My parents are very traditional, very family-oriented, very big push on education. They always say, you're the oldest, you should get good grades, and of course, bring home a good Nigerian girl." In the end, my dissertation argues that Blackness is not a monolith, and does so by showing that marriage between a Nigerian and African-American partner, as depicted by the couple on the left, is an equally informative measure of social integration as a marriage between a Black and white partner, as depicted on the right. My dissertation shows us that in reality, intermarriage and the choice of marital partners is not so black and white. Thank you. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Shohag Chakraborty from the biochemistry program.
I was first exposed to the word cancer when I was 4 years old. I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, a type of blood cancer mostly affecting children. Although I was fortunate enough to win the war against cancer, thousands of people continue to die of cancer every day. While some forms of cancer are now curable and has survival rate that has increased significantly, certain aggressive forms of cancer, such as lung, pancreatic, and prostate cancers, still have a poor prognosis with low survival rate. I was curious to know why currently available anti-cancer drugs can kill and cure some specific forms of cancer, but not others. In major cases, cancer treatment turns out to be unsuccessful because the cancer cells become resistant to the drugs. My research focuses on investigating how some cancers circumvent rapamycin treatment and FDA-approved anti-cancer drug. In my experiments, I observed that while rapamycin could kill breast cancer cells, lung and prostate cancer cells were not affected by rapamycin treatment. In particular, my project demonstrates that cancer cells with mutations in both the RB and P14 proteins are unaffected by rapamycin treatment. Typically, RB and P14 halt cancer growth by suppressing the activity of a protein called E2F. However, when RB and P14 are mutated, E2F allows the cancer cells to propagate. As a result, rapamycin treatment is made ineffective. I was able to show that if E2F activity is suppressed with a chemical inhibitor, then cancer cells can be killed by rapamycin. Hence, this research is a major breakthrough providing vital information about rapamycin's resistance mechanism and has implications for precision medicine approaches to target and eradicate cancer cells. Each cancer type or subtype is a distinct case and has specific genetic mutations that contributes to its progression and survival. Therefore, it is of utmost importance to detect genetic alterations in specific cancers, which will make rapamycin more effective when clinically used in combination with other inhibitors, opening novel avenues for targeted cancer therapy. Thank you. I would like to now turn it over to Johanna Helgren from Psychology and Law program.
Imagine that you were charged with a crime you did not commit. The prosecutor offers you a plea deal, which would mean considerably less prison time than if you risked a jury trial. Would you accept the plea, even if it meant falsely admitting guilt? This hypothetical situation is likely familiar as the dilemma of traditional plea bargaining, in which defendants are required to admit guilt in exchange for a lower sentence. Of the over 3,000 people exonerated to date through the National Registry of Exonerations, almost a quarter accepted guilty pleas for crimes they didn't commit. But what if you could accept the plea while still saying you were innocent? This is known as the Alfred Plea, a type of plea not a lot of us have heard about, despite it being more common than jury trials. Unsurprisingly, the Alfred Plea is controversial among legal scholars. Some argue that it actually increases the number of innocent people who accept pleas. In addition, judges are more likely to see defendants' claims of innocence as a refusal to take accountability, leading them to impose longer sentences. In contrast, advocates of the Alfred Plea suggest that it can benefit defendants who want to avoid the shame and embarrassment of admitting guilt. I wanted to investigate the truth behind these largely unexplored claims and my dissertation is the first empirical study of perceptions and ramifications of the Alfred Plea. My work started with two key questions. Do Alfred pleas increase the risk of innocent people accepting pleas? And do they spare defendants the stigma usually associated with accepting responsibility for a crime? To answer these questions, I recruited 2,000 participants for my dissertation research. First, in an online mock plea bargaining scenario, participants imagined they were accused of wrongdoing, of which they were either innocent or guilty, and offered either a traditional or an Alfred plea. I asked them if they would accept the plea or go to trial. Building on this initial work, I then had participants read about a defendant who was accused of wrongdoing and accepted or rejected either a traditional plea or an Alfred plea. I asked the participants what their perceptions of the defendant and his choices were. I found that although innocent participants were not tempted by an Alfred plea more than a traditional plea, guilty participants were. More importantly, I found that observers had more negative perceptions of defendants who accepted Alfred pleas. Alfred defendants were overall seen as less intelligent, competent, and honest, as well as less remorseful than other defendants. In short, the Alfred plea provided no benefits. Instead, and as expected, the perceived lack of remorse evoked the public's contempt. My findings suggest that defendants who seek to maintain their innocence may be tempted to take an Alfred plea, but to their own detriment. Rather than appropriately being treated equally to defendants who accept traditional pleas, Alfred defendants will be viewed less favorably and in turn treated more punitively, both by courts and by the public. My research brings into focus the disconnect between how the legal system intends plea bargaining to work and how the public perceives it. As my findings suggest, the Alfred plea not only poses problems for innocent and guilty defendants alike, but also points more broadly to the way the criminal justice system is deeply influenced by personal beliefs and perceptions, both by judges and the public. Thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Julian Gonzalez de Leon in the history program.
For the longest time, Mexicans have wondered why we never became a superpower like the United States. That is a trauma of our history. The reason, it is said, is that we were conquered by the Spanish Empire, associated with the supposed backwardness of Catholic authoritarianism, while the United States emerged out of the British Empire under Protestant liberal rationality. Mexican scholars have challenged this idea by trying to uplift Spanish political thought, but I think that's the wrong strategy. Rather than challenging ideas of Spanish backwardness, my dissertation questions the assumed rationality of English political thought. My first claim is that this self-proclaimed rationality is perpetuated in part by an intellectual tradition that works in such a way that uplifts modern reason in the history of political thought. In order to do this, scholars must ignore a series of arguments present in all sorts of sources that do not come from political treatises, but from myths. Therefore, I decided to focus on the myth that was most prominently featured in debates about empire in England, the myth of King Arthur. To study this myth, I immersed myself in several archives in England and digital collections to trace every mention I could find of Arthur between the 15th century and the early 17th century, the dawn of the British Empire. After collecting the data and process it, I laid out a full narrative of the myth and proceed to analyze it. A myth, I claim, is a socially structured story that communicates a series of ideas interconnected in specific ways. I found that during the period I studied, the Arthurian myth connected several ideas between British Confederative Union and imperial expansion. In other words, the concepts of empire and Britain were intimately related in English political thought, and the glue was the Arthurian myth. This specific conceptual dynamic had some specific effects. From the formulation of the name British Empire in the late 16th century, first a reference to Arthur's empire, to the creation of a first legal imperial framework in the early 17th century, traced back as a precedent to Arthur's reign. The significance of my dissertation surpasses the specific of my research. Yes, the British Empire at its origins was grounded in myth and not on the claimed rationality of English Protestant liberal thought, like Anglophone scholars so proudly argue. Therefore, I see my dissertation as an invitation and roadway to shift our gaze away from the supposed triumph of reason and grapple with the social stories that gave rise to our political cultures. Thank you. Now, I would like to pass it on to Melissa Horger from the Psychology Department.
As an undergraduate, I perfected the art of falling asleep in class. I couldn't help it. A wave of fatigue would consume me, and suddenly I was nodding off. These mid-class naps drew me to sleep research, not to figure out the cause, but to understand the role of sleep. To do so, I began studying infants, as the most dynamic shifts in sleep occur before age 3. The gold standard for studying sleep is called polysomnography. It records several physiological measures to monitor nervous system and muscular activity, but it's impractical for most researchers. It's prohibitively expensive in both time and money, and access to these resources is rare. When these traditional methods were beyond my reach, I made the goal of my dissertation to create a more accessible sleep measurement technique. My idea was to parse down the number of measures and simplify the procedures. The benefits were considerable, as it would allow caregivers to put on the equipment and infants to sleep in their own cribs. My study into this novel method, using wireless, cardiorespiratory, and movement sensors, began in late fall of 2019 when I received my first grant. 1-year-old infants participated in 5 nights of sleep measurement to examine our primary sleep states, which are rapid eye movement sleep, or REM, and non-REM. After several weeks, the pool of good data comprised 38 nights. I was thrilled because this would have been nearly impossible to achieve with polysomnography. Few families could have disrupted their schedules and slept away from home for almost a week. Then, of course, came COVID and everything stopped. Fortunately, because the protocol was already designed to take place in the home, data collections were able to resume after only 6 months. As a result, I managed to collect 50 more nights of data before moving on to the coding and analysis. First, I used the movement data to delineate sleep from wake. Then, within the sleep periods, I visually examined the cardiorespiratory data, coding periods of time with lower rates as non-REM and those with higher and more variable rates as REM. The resulting total time spent in each state was comparable to that of 1-year-olds who underwent polysomnography. This confirmed that the protocol was actually working. Visual coding still had flaws, though. It was labor-intensive, subjective, and could only be done on a proprietary user interface. I wrote a programming code to account for this, which evaluated and state scored the raw cardiorespiratory values. Then I made both the code and the infant's data publicly available online for other researchers to build on. I created a solution for myself and hopefully others who can implement this technique in their own specific areas of study. By using more accessible methods, we can expand research on the role of sleep states and better understand why sleep is beneficial to learning and memory, thus adding more justification to my habit of falling asleep in class. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'd like to invite all of our presenters to turn on their mics and cameras, because we're going to start the Q&A period in just a moment. And while they're doing that, I'll just observe, those are fantastic. I was watching some of the comments in the chat. Let's have a round of virtual applause for all our brave and compelling presenters. What fascinating and varied work. So very excited about this. Now, audience, you have to do some thinking about which presentation, I don't know how you're going to pick, that you felt was most effective. And so we're going to put up on the screen a slide that shows all their names and a letter attached to their names. And so look for the name that you're going to want to pick, and we're going to then put up the poll. So there's the names. Still lots of comments coming in. Fantastic presentations. Again, I don't know how you're going to pick your audience favorite, but you must, because you only get to vote once. Is there a place where you can read the full dissertations? Yes, there is, because of course, all of these will be filed in the digital library. Some of our students may put an embargo on their dissertations for a bit while they're preparing books and other things, but they will be available online. And some of our students also are authors of publications. So if you're interested in learning more about their work directly from them, we can connect you to them. Okay, so I'm going to invite now, we'll take our poll down, invite all the students to join us for the Q&A. So please turn on your cameras if you haven't already. We should be able to see you all coming up. I do, that's great. Okay. So we have some questions coming up already. Audience, you're welcome to keep posting there. So we're going to start with Dr. Horter. And the question for you is, what were the limitations to your study?
Really great question. Thank you. So I think one of the biggest limitations for me is that I would like to apply it farther, and I didn't have the time to do that. So I would like to do some of that investigation myself about seeing how sleep and learning interact. And that is on deck for future research right now. But I would say that's the biggest one of what I presented on today.
Fantastic. And like so many dissertations, there's always more work to be done. And there's just a moment where you just have to say, that's the dissertation. So
exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you. Dr. Okibo, how did you use the historical data to show a change in marriage choices over time, through social media or other things?
Thank you for that question. So I used the census data to track trends from 1980 through 2019. And I broke that down by immigrant generation status. So first generation being the Nigerian parents who moved to the States, and then second generation being their US born children, and was able to identify those trends that way. And in terms of social media, that obviously was not available in the 1980s when I began looking at the demographic data, but that certainly plays a role in how individuals are selecting partners today, particularly with dating apps and other online platforms that they're using.
Thank you very much. This question is for Dr. Molinari. So can you elaborate on solidarities enacted post-Hurricane Maria between Puerto Rico and the diaspora?
Sure. Thank you, Shakti, for the question. The diaspora played an absolutely central role in recovery efforts after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And I would say that the post-hurricane experience actually strengthened the solidarities between Puerto Rico and the diaspora. So for example, diaspora folks were central in mutual aid efforts, getting supplies directly to Puerto Rico, and also political advocacy, right? Making sure that politicians and representatives were hearing concerns and advocating on their behalf. And of course, communications, right? Connecting with family members, connecting folks to needed services. And I think that social media really facilitated these solidarities. Thanks for the question.
So question for Max, okay? So if you could make one recommendation to the NYPD about how to improve their interactions with the LGBTQ+ community, what would you say?
That's a good question. It's a little bit of a not quite what I came away with, which is to actually have direct recommendations less to the NYPD and more to other agencies and institutions, because it really seemed like what people were asking for was just less contact with police overall and more of a range of options for dealing with crisis situations that didn't necessarily involve police. So I know I'm not trying to dodge the question. I'm just sort of trying to
understood.
Direct it toward where what my participants were saying.
Okay, no, thank you. That's really that's helpful. Question for George Anwar. So, do you see the potential for CRISPR technology to be developed to treat triple negative breast cancer?
Yes, thank you for the great question. Yes, CRISPR gene editing has the potential to, particularly for the P53, one way that we can use the understanding of CRISPR-Cas9 would be to use it to probably restore the mutated P53 into a functioning wild-type P53. So if that is an avenue that can be explored, then CRISPR-Cas9 can be used to initiate that particular gene editing. So yes, we can do that.
Okay, because that's a really tough type of breast cancer to treat, we know. So here's a question for Lennay Chapman. You had generated a lot of interest in the chat as we were talking here. So, the question is, should the person who's seeking the payment be allowed to force the person paying to pay publicly? Should they even be allowed to do that?
That's a great question. So if we think about the Venmo platform, for example, the way that it works is if you do update your default settings to private, then by default you receive payments by private. And in my mind, given the findings in my research, I think that that's a good way of managing public and private transactions. And so right now, I don't know of any platforms that would force a public payment per se. I don't know that we would recommend that either, but that's an interesting question to think about, and I think something that business managers all over are grappling with. So thank you for that question.
So here's one for Julian Gonzalez de Leon. What was the most surprising source where you found mention of the Arthurian legend?
Thank you for the question. The most surprising was the legal report for the creation of the imperial framework, the colonial framework in Virginia particularly, that was traced back quite literally to Arthur, specifically the Round Table and that kind of order. So to find that literally in a source, that I think that was the most surprising.
So this question is for Shohag. Okay. So your work points to some strategies for making some known molecules like rapamycin more effective by teaming it with something else. So do you see that? Do you know of experiments or studies that are now combining rapamycin with other components for precision medicine for targeting specific types of drug-resistant cancers?
Thank you for the question. So first and foremost, I would like to say that, the research has evolved so much, and even now, I used an older version of rapamycin for my research. Nowadays, there's more advanced and new generation form of rapamycin. So in most cases, you don't need a combination therapy for rapamycin. Rapamycin alone is able to be more effective when used as a single drug. But yes, as per to your question, there are other inhibitors that is in use in combination with rapamycin clinically, that is used as an effective and targeted cancer therapy. Yes.
Great, thank you. Question for Pamela. So, it was sad to learn that certain materials are no longer accessible. They're disintegrating. So this is kind of a two-parter. Are these materials being digitized to preserve them for future analysis and archival research? And have any of those drawings inspired modern productions of Andromeda and Perseo?
I love those questions. First of all, the digitizing of objects has been pursued unevenly across institutions. But for example, the Houghton Library manuscript, you can go right after this. You can look up the name Bacio del Bianco and Andromeda Perseo, and you can see really high resolution digitized images that Harvard has made available for everyone to enjoy. Also certain collections, many of the Italian collections, so for example, of the almost 300 drawings of Bacio's in the Uffizzi's collection, maybe about 80 or 90 are digitized. So they have a really robust program, but the Spanish sources are unfortunately not yet fully digitized. But that is something that the European Union has invested in over time. So hopefully that funding will remain robust. And in terms of influence, while there are no recent productions, I would say probably post 1800 of this particular show, the work of the designer here was essentially repeated and copied and disseminated. And so you see this type of work continuing. You can go to the Met and see something similar or derived from this type of work even today. So it's still very important to the culture of all kinds of theater internationally.
Lives on. That's awesome. So question for Dr. Helgren. This is the Alfred Plea is a complicated thing. So do you see a way to begin to change the public and judicial perceptions of the Alfred Plea, or is there evidence that those entering the Alfred Plea actually were less remorseful as people perceive?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you. Actually, I have future research that intends to look more at the perceptions of the plea and defendants who take it, and sort of how that affects their view of the system as a whole. Because I believe, like I said, it's a very controversial plea, and I think that it probably affects people's view of it. I had one participant in my dissertation who, when I presented it to them, they said, well, this isn't allowed. You can't say you're innocent and still plead guilty. And that's kind of an example of how unknown it is, but also how crazy it seems. So I think more public awareness is needed. I think very long term, I believe we need to move away from it, because regardless if it's innocent or guilty people accepting it, it has negative consequences. Beyond what I talked about, it can also have consequences for parole and probation and aspects future down the line of the criminal process. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, well, it's a complicated thing. So the final question, because I know you're all excited to know who the winners are. Final question is for Lynn Stillings. So do you see the potential for the Senegalese approach to, using music and arts to, developing perceptions of children's rights? Do you see that might be adopted or adapted in other countries? And how might that take place, through NGOs or global aid agencies?
Thank you so much for your question. And I think it's an important one. I would say right off the bat, yes, I do see the potential for this. And I think that musical projects like this are happening in other parts of the world. As other ethnomusicologists have researched, this is kind of a new emerging body of research coming out of the field of ethnomusicology. But the Senegalese approach, what I think is so important to understand is that there's really more of a bottom-up approach to this discourse of children's rights. It's not just international NGOs who are coming in and funding local staff or local offices. It's a local Senegalese TV show and a local youth hip hop association, and even in schools where children are being introduced to concepts of rights through music. So I do think that this is, I think it is happening already in other places. And I think that's what's so important to think about, is maybe not how can we install these similar programs, but how can programs that already exist that are like this, performance or arts programs that engage children and young people in discourses of rights and development, how can we further support those types of efforts?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I wish we could get a few more questions, but it is time to announce the awards. So if all of our presenters could please turn off your cameras and mics for a few moments. And just to add to the suspense, folks, I want to first acknowledge the donors and supporters who made the showcase possible. Special thanks to our longstanding foundation board member and today a showcase judge, Joanna Migdoll. Thank you. And for putting this fantastic showcase together, from choosing the presenters to helping them hone their presentations, I want to thank the Office of Public Programs, headed by Karen Sanders. Thank also to Professor Duncan Faherty, the faculty lead for the showcase, and to David Olin, the Associate Provost and Dean for Academic Affairs. So I have the results from the audience poll, and the winner of our first Audience Choice Award is Karen Okibo. So Karen, would you please join us back on screen and turn on your mic? And you get to say a few words if you like.
I'm honestly too shocked and stunned to speak. Thank you so much to everyone who voted. I feel like I'm winning an Academy Award right now, so I don't really know what else to say besides thank you. I've had the most phenomenal experience at the Graduate Center. I'm so grateful for all the opportunities it's afforded me, from my fantastic committee, my wonderful cohort and colleagues, my Clackles family, my students, and a special thank you to all the informants and interview participants who shared their lives and stories with me. So thank you so much for this.
And congratulations. Okay, so if you could please turn off your mic, then and your camera, and the judges have made their decision. So I'm honored to announce that the winner of the 2022 Presidential Prize for Public Communication is George Honor. So George, would you please join us on the screen and put your mic on and give you a chance to say a few words too.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ellison, thank you. So thank you all for the judges. I'm really, really, really appreciative of this opportunity. I have an amazing team that have been with me throughout this PhD program. And my mentor, Dr. Bagonetti, has also been very, very supportive throughout the program, giving me the opportunity to work in her lab. And Karen, Duncan, and Jimmy for constantly the back and forth that we had whilst I was going through the write-up. I appreciate all of you. For the participants, to thank you all for joining. I'm even short of words, but thank you.
Congratulations. All right, if you would please, you could turn off your camera and mic. And finally, I just want to say congratulations to all of our fantastic presenters, not just our awardees, but also to our community of friends and family, students and postdocs and faculty in the audience. You've been fantastic. If you'd like to follow up with questions, we can connect you to the presenters. They were really happy to see you and hear your feedback and have you here to support them today. Outstanding research, the ability to communicate it to the public, they're fundamental to a doctoral education at the CUNY Graduate Center. Here, our students become prepared to become leaders in their fields to make a difference in the world. Congratulations to all of our presenters today. They are well on their way. Best wishes to all of you. And to our audience, thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you in person next year. Thank you again for coming and have a great evening. Bye.